the attorney for the Bedminster Hills Housing Corporation. Many of you over the years have dealt with our executive director, Sharon DeSico, while your units that you occupied were deed restricted affordable housing units. And the BHHC, Bedminster Hills Housing Corporation, provides services to the township concerning its affordable housing program. So that's why BHHC recently sent to residents in the Cortland neighborhood and in the Parkside neighborhood a letter about what happens when your deed restrictions expire. Now, in Parkside, those restrictions expired in August of 2017, almost 2 years ago. And in Cortland, they just expired on April 7th of this year. Now, the reason they expired was that your communities are all governed by what's called a master deed. And sitting in front of me, you can see two binders. One is the Cortland master deed, the other is the Parkside master deed. Within the master deed, there are rules and regulations about how you govern yourself and how the two communities handle matters, such as assessments for extraordinary expenses if you had a big snowstorm, the routine running of the communities, how the board of directors gets elected. Every year, I think you elect members to represent you on your own internal condominium board. But there's also a section in the back of the master deeds which sets forth the rules and the regulations and the restrictions that apply to the units within the community which are deed restricted affordable housing units. And as you probably know, there are 4 communities in Bedminster that have affordable housing units, and Cortland and Parkside are two of those two communities that have affordable housing units within their condominium. So we, Bedminster Hills Housing Corporation, we're responsible for identifying when your deed restrictions were to expire. And if I get the right button.
The second one.
Looking at the...
Here. This is bottom.
Oh, the bottom. Thanks.
Yeah. Bottom.
Bottom, thank you. So the Parkside neighborhood community, as indicated right here, is governed by one of these master deeds sitting in front of you. And that's been recorded in the Somerset County Clerk, and this is what governs the operation of your community. And in the master deed, there is a section, Article 10, in the back of the and we have a copy of that for you. What we're putting up here, Judy already handed out, so you can take a look at the materials we handed out. And Section 10 clearly states how long your affordable housing deed restrictions live. And they run from 30 years from the date of this document. Okay, that's how we calculate when your deed restriction expires. So I don't think there's any dispute about that, and I think most of you in the audience who have lived in affordable units were happy to know that at some point in time you were going to have market rate units. You could go to a realtor, you could list those for sale, and you could enjoy the benefit of selling at market, not a restricted price. But the bold section of this is the second part of this Article 10. And it says, and I'll be the first to admit that it's anything but crystal clear, but it says, provided, however, that the recapture obligation. Now, I think you probably know, or you may not know if you've never sold your affordable housing unit, but when your units were restricted as affordable housing units, okay, and you wanted to sell to another affordable housing household, somebody who qualifies, you would usually pick up the telephone, you would give Sharon a call and say, I would like to sell my Parkside affordable housing 2-bedroom unit. What is the maximum resale price for that unit? Sharon would say, well, okay, you paid X number of dollars for it. The median income is adjusted over the number of years between the time you bought it and the time you want to sell it. She might ask you, did you install recently a new fridge? How about a dishwasher, if you're allowed to have dishwashers? How about any of the other appliances, any improvements? And then we would figure out what the maximum restricted affordable resale price would be. And after doing that, out of the appreciation that you got on the property, in other words, from what you paid for the unit, and then what got built into the appreciation in terms of the increase in the median income since you bought and since you sold, okay? We would be entitled to a recapture fee or a percentage of that, 20% of whatever your appreciation was. That's basically the fee you would pay to Sharon and BHHC for telling you how much your unit was worth, what you could sell it for, working with the person that you found or she found to buy your unit as an affordable purchaser, facilitating the sale, hopefully, and then having you sell your unit. So there was a 20% fee that you would pay when your units were still affordable housing restricted. That's called a recapture fee. And that's an important term to remember and follow. Because as we're reading the dark stuff here, it says, provided, however, the recapture obligation set forth in Article 7, and you have a copy of Article 7 too, which is how you calculate what I just went through, how you calculate the sales price and the recapture fee, of this declaration shall remain in effect after the expiration of the resale restrictions of this declaration for each owner. Stop there. So that language says that the first part is pretty easy to follow. 30 years, the date of that document, your deed restriction expires, you can sell for market rate. Okay, so I don't think there's any dispute or anything about that. But the second part, dealing with the duration of your restriction, goes on to say, however, that your recapture obligation, in other words, your obligation to pay that 20% of the profit or the appreciation on the property continues. That's what it seems to say. That's what we at the BHC meeting for some time. And it says that the declaration remains in effect after the expiration of the resale restrictions of this declaration for each owner of a condominium unit who purchased a condominium unit during the 30 years, in other words, when you owned it, because you owned it during the 30 years, effective period of the declaration. The recapture obligation shall expire, in other words, it'll go away upon its satisfaction in accordance with the provisions of Article Roman numeral 7, when the first resale of that condominium takes place after the expiration of the resale restriction of this declaration. A lot of words, and some crazy lawyer must have written them because they're very hard to understand. But that's what appears in both master deeds for Parkside, and it appears this identical language because they were written basically by the same law firm that was representing the Hills and the others who at the time were suing the town over their affordable housing obligation. But the same document exists for both of your communities. So Section 10 really says two things. One is after 30 years, your affordable housing deed restriction is gone. We all agree upon that. But the second section, which we've highlighted there, indicates that the obligation to pay the 20% of the appreciation or the profit from the sale seems to still go to the BHHC on behalf of the township in order to continue to administer or replace your unit with another unit in the affordable housing inventory. That's what it seems to say. I think that's what it does say. And so the obligation to pay that fee goes beyond the 30 years. And that's what it says. I believe we have the same, this is the calculation of the recapture amount. We can go over that with you. And you do have a handout, which is this slide, which basically walks you through it. But in summary, you go through the calculation and you do what I just described. In other words, you would go to Sharon when you had the unit restricted and say, Sharon, I want to sell my 3-bedroom unit. What can I sell it for? And Sharon would calculate for you what the restricted resale price would be, plus other things which might qualify to boost your basis in the property. And then you would go out and either find a buyer, and we would qualify the buyer, and then you would sell the unit and you would be done. We have to follow, because that Article 10 says you got to go back to Article 7 and you got to follow the recapture fee formula when you come to the first market sale. So that's what the handout that you have, that Judy gave to you, says, that you go through the calculation, and when you figure out what the quote-unquote profit is on your market sale, the BHHC, but really for the benefit of the town's affordable housing program, is entitled to 20% of that profit. Now, we would clearly build into your basis, in other words, what your resale price would be, and all the expenses related to you selling at market. So, for example, you might hire a lawyer like me or somebody else to represent you, pay $1,000. You would have to pay, in New Jersey, what's called a realty transfer tax, a fee. You pay that based upon the value of your unit. You're probably going to pay a real estate person, 6% or 5% or whatever it is. So all of those expenses associated with the sale of your property, which are set forth in your closing statement, your summary, or used to be called HUD settlement statement, and now it's called the seller's disclosure statement. We would add all that stuff up, then we figure out what you're selling it for in terms of the market rate. And then that delta, which is really the profit that you realized on the property, BHAC, on behalf of the township, would be entitled to 20% of that profit. So we'd have to follow the calculation that's set forth there. Cortland, this just refers again to your book and where your restrictions appear. The language is identical. This is Cortland. It's identical. You have copies of it for Parkside. You have copies of it for Cortland. You can read them side by side. They say the same thing. They require the same thing in terms of the first market sale. And then you have to go in again to the Section 7 calculation under your master deed. This isn't a requirement of BHHC or the township. This is a requirement of the document that governs how your community operates, called the master deed. It's a private document. We didn't prepare this document. The township didn't prepare it. BHHC didn't prepare it. This is a private document that you should have gotten a copy of. I'm sure you've long gone lost, but you should have gotten a copy of it when you bought your unit. Somebody should have given it to you. A title company, when you bought your unit 30 years ago or 10 years ago, got a copy of this. They went down to the Somerset County clerk. They got a copy of this master deed. They should have made a copy of the master deed available to you. And your attorney or your title agent should have said to you at the closing, although sometimes it doesn't happen, do you have any questions about this 1,000-page document that I'm going to give you? Nobody has. Nobody reads it, to be honest with you. Nobody reads it. But you should have gotten one. And it should have been a part of your package when you bought your unit. But these are private instruments that were put together when your community was organized before they started to sell units to you all. And we're just simply following what your documents tell us we have to do. And that's, again, having to do the calculation. We give you an example of how the recapture fee on the first market sale might be handled in a hypothetical situation, okay? And remember, it's always 20%. So the unit purchased in 2004, our example, would be that you bought the unit for $138,000. The unit sold in 2018 for $205,000, okay? The improvements that went into the unit, which count towards building up your basis, were $4,000, made 2 years before the sale. So what we do is we depreciate those things straight line depreciation over 10 years. So you lose 10% of your new refrigerator or your new appliance that you put in there, okay? You paid a realtor commission of 5%, an attorney fee of $1,000, and you paid this wicked realty transfer fee that the state of New Jersey requires that you pay. So if you apply all of that stuff to this hypothetical, the value of the improvement would be $4,000 less 20% because they're 2 years old, so they've been depreciated, okay? And so therefore you get a depreciation of $3,200. So the cost of sale, the realtor commission 5%, would be $10,250. The attorney fee gets piled on top of that because it's an expense that you had. The realty transfer fee, which is nearly $1,000, that gets piled in there as well. So the adjusted resale price on your unit that you sold for $205 builds up to $189,574. So when you do that and subtract that and multiply it by 20%, your documents say that there's a recapture fee that's owed to BHHC on behalf of the township of $10,315.20. That's how you do the math under your master deed. That's what it says. And then there's some footnotes here. You might be partially exempt from the fee that we put up there. If you're over a certain age, you might pay a lesser fee and so on. So we just took an example of a unit that might sell and applied some factors so that you can see that it's not the delta between what the restricted price would be and what you really sold for. We pile stuff into the restricted price to get your basis up as high as we can before we apply the 20%. I think that's only a fair way to apply this rule. Now, we had a great debate with Judy about do we or don't we put in this slide about what's called the 95-5 rule. Let me just say at the very beginning, your communities are not subject to this rule, 95-5 rule, okay? You're not subject to this rule. However, this 95-5 rule applies to newer units that were or could have been created here in Bedminster and are being created today throughout the state, okay? There are regulations called the Uniform Housing Affordability Controls. They call it UHAC. And those are regulations that are statewide that have to be followed by every affordable housing program in every town. And in those rules and the regulations, not in the master deed, you're governed by these master deeds, not the 95-5 rules. But in the 95-5 rule, it says that if your unit was to have been subject to the 95-5 rule because it was a newer unit in another town where this is applicable, okay? The example I gave you about building up the basis in your house on the $138,000 sale, so let's say we build it up to 189 and the differential to 250, it's 205, so therefore you're going to owe us $10,000. This 95-5 rule says that the delta between your restricted sales price, your affordable sales price, and your market price, if you sold the unit, the town would get 90 profit. You would get the restricted sales price plus 5%. That's the 95-5 rule. 95% of the appreciation, you're not covered by this, so I don't want to scare you, but the 95% of the delta being the affordable price and the market rate price in any other town for a newer unit that's subject to this statewide rule, the profit, 95% of that profit, you'd get the maximum resale price plus 5%. The town gets 95% money. So our thinking, when we had a BHHC meeting, stood around and debated this rule that's in your master deed, our thinking is that when your documents were put together back in the 80s, it was kind of the precursor to what the state eventually did in 2004 when they did this UHAG rule, the 95-5 rule for all the new units. And the theory was that when the deed restrictions go away, a good chunk, well, the state, of course, it's the state of New Jersey, so no wonder it's 95%. But the state said that a good chunk of the money that you're going to make by living in this unit on 30 years and 1 day, when you sell it, should go back into the local municipality to help replace that unit or do additional affordable housing in the town. Why? Because we're losing an affordable housing unit. Your unit was once affordable, now it's gone. And the town, and the good mayor can tell you the struggle that towns go through in order to satisfy their affordable housing obligation. The town has to replace that unit. You have to come up with something else, right? So the theory behind the 95-5 rule, we understand, was that a good chunk, 95% of the profit, ended up staying with the municipality to reinvest in other affordable housing. In your case, you're not covered by the 95-5 rule, thank God. It's bad enough for you that you're covered by the 20% rule in your affordable housing documents. But we put that up there to give you an idea, not to make you feel good, because I know nobody sitting out there feels good right now, but to know that that's probably where this idea about even after your restriction goes away, on the first sale after the restriction, you have to pay back to the town some proportion of the profit that you got long-term by being in this unit, and that you don't get to keep that entire profit. Some of that needs to come back to the municipality that's going to have to reinvest it in affordable housing. So with those comments, I think those are probably all the, well, there, we gave you an example of the wicked recapture, the 95-5 recapture rule. And again, it's the same kind of math that we just went over, but instead of applying a 20% obligation, it applies a 95% obligation. And you can see the proceeds to the administrative agent in that illustration total $86,000, which is unbelievable, but that's how it would work if you were a 95-5.
Well, since we're not, why don't you keep mentioning it? We're not.
Only to explain.
Just keep out and work.
Right.
Hold on. Okay, forgive me. But were you the attorney that was represented by the first people that sold in Parkside in 2017?
I didn't represent any of those people.
No. Were you signing off on those?
I didn't sign off on
When
any.
people sold their units in Parkside in 2017, somebody on this side had to be a representative, right?
No. It was a market rate sale.
Right.
We didn't know that.
Nobody paid a recapture fee.
Yes, that's right.
Nobody paid a recapture fee, and
It is all
you
part
were
of the
saying
mixed
that we
use
should have
bylaw.
informed people throw their bylaws away. She should have done her job, and she never does.
No.
But she should have sent down to 2016, this is what's gonna happen when you sell your unit. So the first 11 to 15 people in Parkside sold.
Yes.
Then, Cleves Card, who's a neighbor of mine, sold his unit in October. He was forced to put $25,000 in escrow. Then, his lawyer negotiated with somebody, and he got his money back. He didn't pay. Then, all of a sudden, conveniently, Shatter just sent a letter out saying, we want our money back.
That's right.
Well,
No, this is the truth. This is what's going on. Now you're trying to cover up because you people messed up, and we're gonna have to pay? No, not paying.
us
Not paying.
people, excuse me.
The first 15
Excuse me, can I
people
respond?
not paying. I'm not paying.
Can I respond? Us people didn't mess up.
Well, yeah, no. Then how
It's
does-
right here, it's right here. It's your governing documents, okay? Not
I don't care
ours.
about the documents. You even said that half the people probably don't have it. You just even said that.
Right.
You should have sent those documents.
When
You messed up.
there were 25.
Oh, no, stop. You messed up.
Please, hold on. Please, let maybe
The
others
first
explain.
15 people paid?
Please.
No. So you're trying to get it off of us now because you screwed up.
We now,
Let me just start. Come on.
excuse me, would you sit
Please,
down?
you're just getting a mumbo jumbo of stuff that they're trying to open your tracks. You did not collect the money from anybody in Parkside that sold.
We're-
Now you're trying to get us.
We're aware that there were sales from 2017 to date in Parkside who didn't pay the fee. We were unaware of the closings. We don't get invited to those. We weren't notified about those. We knew nothing about those. There are 23 people that did that. We've been in touch with 3 of them. We'll get in touch with the other 20.
No.
We will pursue what they're supposed to do, and that is pay the 20% recapture. Right.
As a matter of fact, you just reimbursed, you were reimbursed.
That doesn't, we will pursue getting the recapture fee paid as your documents require, that they be paid. But it doesn't forgive everybody else the
No,
obligation.
you part the whole first class. You guys got like 20 things. You write it off. You're gonna end up in court. You reimbursed the car 25 grand. You gave it back to him.
We have-
Now you sent the letter saying, we want it back.
We have no idea what you're talking about. We haven't seen 25,000,
You
right?
want me to get cleaned up here?
No, I don't
Oh,
care.
yeah, just talk an hour ago.
We have no idea
Okay, right.
about any of the closings that took place.
Right.
We do know that we sent out,
Sharon, did you send a paper letter saying, I want my money back after it was reimbursed? Did you?
Everyone that
Yeah.
sold their
I
unit
don't know nothing.
got...
I don't know nothing.
Excuse me, everyone that sold their unit got...
wait a minute,
One at a time.
time out. We have a little decorum here, please. This young lady has a question.
I have a question about all of our taxes went up. How does
Yeah,
that-
you get money back. Thank you, guys.
Please, thank you.
I'll shut up.
Our tax assessors here, Ed, can talk to that
I'd like
issue.
to know how that plays into this. We're paying more taxes now. I didn't get any more square footage. I didn't get any additional property. Why are we paying extra taxes?
Because your deed restriction expired.
Okay. And is that in this also?
No, that's just how it works from a tax point of view. Maybe Ed can comment on that. Ed, would you mind explaining why the taxes were adjusted?
I can understand that. You don't have to explain that.
You get more money now, because the house.
Wendy,
gets her time.
You're getting 20% of more money than you know.
Please, we're gonna have the tax assessor explain and answer your question, okay?
Okay, good evening. My name's Ed Kerwin. I'm your tax assessor. The reason your assessment or taxes went up when the deed restriction expired in August of 17, I, as the assessor, assess properties as of October 1st of every year. So approximately a month and a half after the deed restriction expired, I was assessing each of the properties at market value, trying to determine what an A model would sell for, a B model would sell for, a C and a D. As a result of that, your assessments were considerably less because of the deed restriction. And as a result of that, your assessments increased to an estimated market value for the unit you own or everybody in this room owns. So that's why your taxes went up, because you had the low taxes and the low assessment for the entire deed restriction time, and as of August, it expired, and it's my responsibility to assess you then, just like at market value, just like any other unit in the hills, or in the town, for that matter. Yes, sir.
What's your last name? How do you spell your last name?
Kerwin.
Are you related to the owner of both these units?
No, I'm not. No relation, no family ties whatsoever or friendship, no.
What is Sharon DeSico's salary, annual salary?
Sharon DeSico's annual salary, I couldn't tell you, sir. I don't really pay attention to other people's salaries.
Does she get a percentage of things?
Excuse me, I have a hard of hearing, so I
Does
apologize.
she get a percentage of the recapture fee? Does she get any kind of fees from the recapture, from Bedminster Hills Housing?
You'd have to ask her. I can answer that one.
I can answer. The answer is no. BHAC doesn't get any, the executive director, nobody else gets any percentage or any of that fee.
Let me ask you a question. I wanted to know if there was such a thing. Why didn't you guys, when you sent us the paper, you didn't mention that in that paper that we could decide, we could be part of that, the town still, the model or whatever, housing, or we could just, but you didn't. You didn't mention. And then you didn't mention it. After 2 years, after we are paying $800 more for me, that I work 12 hours a day, $800 more, you guys didn't do any favor for us. Because if I would sell my house for 154, you would get the 20% anyway. We were supposed to give you 20%. You would get less. Now we have to pay more tax, and we have to give you more, even more out of our apartment or whatever, and we sell it to you the 20%. For me, personally, if I have to pay the lawyer, whatever I make on my condo, I give it to the lawyer, but I won't give a penny to you. Because the guys is doing I swear to God, I called her. I wanted to just look at the place. I live in 44 Chesapeake Court. I was going to look at the studio downstairs because I was going to change. She didn't even let me look at it. I had to go and sell my place, go through the paperwork to be able to look at the place. But the guy next to me, the owner that he rented illegally for so many years since I am there, 42, next to, she had 5 apartments. I wanted to know how he could get 5 condos. And I couldn't even look at the place. That is not right. And after 2 years, you cannot tell us what to do. You should have sent the paper at that time when I could have stayed and I don't pay the tax. Why I have to pay tax? More tax, or why I have to give you 20%? I don't think that is right. If you go to their store and they make a mistake, they have a price and it's not right, they're gonna give it to you because they made a mistake. It's not our mistake. You should have sent the paper.
Exactly. It's not you, you're the tax assessor. I can understand your job.
So you should do it.
She did not do my job. You know the last time she actually brought somebody in to show a unit, like Rose Eaton used to do? Now, she used to tell people, oh, just go up there and look at it. I'm supposed to bring you up there. I could get 5 people that said that. She said that to.
And I would just like to respond to the lady. Excuse me, sir.
If you want to opt out, you should have been informed of this. And then no choice. 23 people did not, and that's you messed up. You messed up.
I would like to respond to the lady that was
I don't want to start Sharon yet. I think really Sharon.
You're the tax assessor.
Sharon, come on up.
Excuse me. I think we should just listen to Sharon, okay?
Sharon's probably makes over 100.
Sir? See you there. Is that okay?
You get the mic, they're taping us.
So tired of it, 45 years.
Let her respond.
Hi. I would just like to respond to the lady sitting over there that had the comments about not being able to view a unit. First of all, she owns an affordable housing unit, so really, she is not a candidate to view someone else's unit. She did not reapply for the program to see if she still was even income qualified to look at another unit. And I certainly cannot sell her an affordable unit when she owns an affordable unit in Bedminster.
Did I say that you have to sell to me? I just wanted to look at it to decide if I want to get it, and I don't have no problem with that. If that's the rule, I don't have no problem.
That is the rule. You own an affordable housing unit in
I don't have
Parkside.
any problem with that. But I have a problem when you send me the paper, you didn't mention in that paper that we have to pay 20%. If I would have decided to stay with you guys or go on my own. You did it. You cannot send it after 2 years. I'm sorry.
That's not the guy you want. You're trying to cover your tracks.
Sharon, you get the job.
This young lady has a question, and then there's one here.
So I represent the Council for Parkside Neighborhood Condominium Association. I think the concern here are a few things. One is fairness. So as the gentleman back there was stating, was that I understand that there's no legal obligation for the BHHC to advise everybody about the master deed and what the provisions are. I understand that. But is there not a legal obligation to BHHC to collect the recapture fee before the first sale takes place? There are 23 units that were sold 2 years ago who did not pay the recapture fee. I understand you're going to make every effort to go after them, but I'm sure, as everyone else can imagine, how difficult that's going to be, if not impossible, to contact every single person. So it's not fair that some people have to pay while others do not have to pay. And it prejudices the unit owners that you do not, that the delay of notifying the unit owners of the recapture fee is a prejudice to them. Because now some unit owners, after the March 27th letter was sent out, have to pay the recapture fee, while others, 2, 4, 5, or all 23, may not have to pay. And that's just not fair to the unit owners here.
Well, to respond, ma'am, please, can we just do it one at a time? Let me respond to your first question.
Sure.
About us knowing when the first market sale would take place on a Parkside unit. How would we know that?
How are you gonna know going
Please, please.
Doug,
How would we know that?
if you would have known that that letter had went out as soon as the affordable controls were over. When it expired, that letter should have gone out immediately. We absolutely would have notified you.
So they went out.
You can't send that 2 years later and then go back and try to ask people for it. It's impossible to contact people. I mean, that's one. Second one, it goes for true letter. My second
And you
issue
know what people are
is,
so
where's
important. I do everything I can.
Please, can we do this one at a time? You're gonna be here all night.
Yeah, well, we will.
Please, man.
the recapture fee that you guys are getting, where is that money going to? What is it being used for? 'Cause my understanding is the BHHC is there to assist the communities, provide assistance, et cetera. I know for Parkside neighborhood, we had capital improvements years ago. We asked the BHHC for assistance. And not only did they not provide Parkside with the entire amount that was requested, but they also loaned the money to Parkside. So we had to actually repay that back. And we had to repay the loan, not only the loan, but the interest as well. So is this money going back to the communities, the 20% recapture fee? Where is this money going?
It's going back to the township's affordable housing program. That provides assistance to people with down payments set aside. We had the condominium assistance program when your community got money about 4 years ago. Pardon me?
It was a loan.
What was it, a low interest, no interest loan?
Right.
Right.
It was a grant.
It was a grant.
That was a grant.
31,000.
31,000 was a grant. So the answer is, it's not going into the township coffers, it's going to go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for affordable housing purposes. That's where it's
Can
going.
we see a budget then, for the BHC to see where monies are being given, what's happening, financials, audits, just to see what the BHC is doing with the money that they're getting?
Well, we could talk to the township about that. We're not a public, we're a private nonprofit corporation contracted to the town to do what we're supposed to do, and that is oversee and administer the program. So it's not,
Overseen correctly.
but sure, we can, if that makes you more comfortable, we can look into that, sure.
Do any of the members of the BHC have any ties with the builders who built the units here?
Does the BHAC have a tie with the builders?
Yes.
No, other than we assist in the resale of the affordable units. Within the units, within the communities, they're affordable units still, and when they come up for resale, we facilitate that at all 4 communities. We have no relationship whatsoever with any of the builders at all. Yes, ma'am.
Why wasn't this like, given when we first got our letters? Why wasn't it?
Back in 17?
Yes.
I think
And we
honest,
should have had a choice. We should have had an option. Either stay in affordable housing, or when you sell, you have 20% of that.
Unfair to employees.
That's unfair.
On Parkside.
Now, and here we
I'm
have 2
not
years later.
speaking for Portland, but on Parkside.
I understand.
Unfair to
The-
impose that fee now 2 years later.
You're right. In hindsight, you should have gotten a letter in 17 that said you owe 20% if you're going to get a profit out of the property. I agree with 100%.
Okay, so what are you guys gonna do about that? Because like, that's
Well,
not fair.
what we're doing is that there are 23 people that we know have sold the units and that we are in touch with, and we contacted most of them already. And we'll pursue that. But we put everybody else on notice now in Portland and Parkside that that's what your governing documents say have to be done.
So your take on it?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Since we were provided with this information back when we had the choice to let Sharon know whether or not we wanted to go to fair market or stay for
Right.
affordable housing, I noticed here on those letters dated March 27th from Sharon saying that finally you should have your unit receive its favorable assessment as an affordable housing unit and reduce real property tax that you currently pay. Please contact us and we will prepare an extension. So you're saying that we can go ahead and go back to affordable housing?
Sure.
How am I going to follow it?
We would give you what's called an extension of the controls. Your taxes would be adjusted by Ed to be deed restricted again as an affordable housing unit, and you would remain a part of the affordable housing inventory.
How long is the extension? Another 10 years, 30 years?
Well, it'll be a 30-year extension.
When those owners have to requalify, but they can requalify.
Once you own an affordable housing unit, you own it. So if you wanted to extend to stay in there, you can do
But
that.
how would you go from market value back to the affordable housing without requalifying?
Well, if you haven't sold it.
That's like a new owner.
Well, no. What we're saying is, if after the fact, if now, somebody wanted to say, I'd like to re-enroll my unit in the affordable housing program.
But they didn't do that when it went market value.
No, they haven't sold it. They haven't sold it for market
It doesn't
value.
matter. If you went market value and you're paying market value taxes, you can't go back 2 years later and say, okay, now that person can resign. How would you not have to requalify?
Well, we could look
That
into
doesn't make it,
we could look into the
that's almost like you're
requalification.
making up rules.
I think we
Because the owner would have to qualify.
we would be thrilled to re-enroll anybody in any of the communities in the program and continue to have a deed restricted unit for 30 years.
But that
I
doesn't make any
believe,
sense to your rules of qualifying to be in affordable housing.
well, okay, we would re-qualify you to do that, but if
So then
you
what if they
haven't,
didn't requalify?
pardon me?
So what if they didn't requalify after that many times? I can tell you I wouldn't requalify. If I wanted to resign my unit at my salary now, I definitely wouldn't requalify after 15 years.
We could take a look at what we would have to do to re-enroll you in the program if you're interested in doing that.
So then why can't we take a look at what you have to do to fix the mistake? Because you can't come back 18 months later after units have already sold. People sold their units based on what they thought they were walking away with. People have brought in contracts now to sell their units for what they made decisions on what they thought they were going to get. So how can you then go back after someone has already reinvested this money, has already bought another home, did whatever they did with it, and say, now you have this final obligation, and you're talking thousands of dollars. This isn't a small amount of money.
These master deeds are recorded legal instruments that appear in the Somerset County
Okay, but
Clerk's.
why-
Please, can I respond?
When
Can I respond? The master deeds are recorded instruments in the Somerset County Clerk's office.
Understood.
You're a seller, you want to sell your house, your buyer comes to the table with a title agent. The title agent's responsibility is to look up the master deed and find out what you, the seller, not what BHAC tells you, excuse me, what BHAC tells you is irrelevant. What that document tells you is what you have to do.
I understand.
So the title company at that closing should have said, there's a deed restriction here that calls for a 20% recapture fee 2 years ago. You better do something about that, seller, and we would have addressed it. We didn't know about the closings, and we would have addressed it then.
So wait a minute, first of all, if you're gonna get this recapture fee, then the person that bought Clee's house is the attorney that actually discovered this. And he was forced to put $25,000 into escrow. He got that refunded after his lawyer.
Who refunded?
Can't do it, and they see
We don't know either. We have no idea what you're talking about.
It was, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
We weren't at the closing, we didn't represent the seller, we had no idea that somebody $25,000 escrow. But I guess that point would be that at least one attorney and one title company must have read the master deed. If they escrowed some money and then gave it back, I don't know why they did, but nobody contacted us about the
So how
20%.
could you let 23 units go and say to me, you gotta pay 20% now?
Because that's what the master deed requires, that, not me.
You know, every person that sells a unit now, you're gonna end up in court with them, because we're all gonna fight you.
That's
And that's
fine.
gonna cost
You have that
money.
right.
It's
You have
gonna
that
cost
right.
the DHS money, and
Yes,
once
ma'am.
this is discovered, you're gonna lose.
Yes, ma'am. The other man.
I know, because I'm right.
So, that's the 23 people that sold it.
23.
23. But now you're saying the people that sell now, how are you gonna know about us selling? Are you gonna sell our units for us?
Yeah.
There's a covenant that's been filed in the Somerset County Clerk's office. Now,
Okay, but why wasn't it done when everybody was
because we needed to figure out a way to know when the unit was sold.
So that should affect the market, it should not affect Parkside when we went there probably 2 years ago. That's right.
The covenant's in this book. Nobody read it.
People probably don't have it anymore from 30 years ago.
So-
You even said that.
Right, they may not have it.
So you should have sent us this,
But a
then you said sign off
But
or not.
a title company's responsibility is to find that book and read it.
Listen, we can go back and forth. The bottom line is that when you gave us the option to sign off, you should have sent us this information. You didn't. You screwed up.
That's your
It's
opinion, sir.
I would love to have a judge see that. I would love to have a judge say, "Buy it there."
Okay.
Well, it's a little bit on.
Yes, sir.
Column would be rolling right now.
Other than Courtney, so with this, with the date expiring, that's from the 30 years ago, whether I've been there almost 30 years, whether 30 years or somebody 15 years, correct?
Right.
It's going to expire, and you're either going to opt in or opt out, right?
Right.
So when can we find out from Ed what a new assessment would be if we opt out? You know, what our taxes are now versus what they would be, to make that decision.
You don't find out.
You need to-
So,
Do you want to hand
Here you go.
it back?
Ed will answer.
sir, along with that, so when we get to that, when we have a time frame and timeline to decide, okay, we know what our taxes will be, and then we're not restricted to rentals, so
Right.
market value, separate one option versus the other. I think we need to know when we're gonna have that hard figure to help us decide which way we're gonna go, either to stay in for another 30 years and keep it and go with the restrictions we know we have
Right.
versus opting out. So I think to avoid the problems that's happened in our side.
Right.
I think we need to know first what our new assessment will be if we opt out, and then, you know, so something that, a timeframe to say, we need to decide by May. Okay, I think that's fair enough.
So everybody, I guess, heard the question. The question is, you're in Cortland, you may want to decide or may not want to decide to re-up as an affordable unit. If you did, what would your taxes be? Would they go down? And how long would you have to do it? Ed is probably handing out something that explains how he would look at adjusting your taxes. My gut tells me that it would probably go backwards like they were before, like when you were a restricted unit, before Ed had to make the adjustment with the expiration.
What do you mean go back?
Well, after Ed hands that out, let's ask him. But if Ed is not adjusted, your deed restriction just expired, right? So right now, up until October 1st of this year, clearly you're going to continue to be assessed as an affordable, right?
I'm sorry, where did I miss that? That's the timeline?
Timeline. Ed has to take a look at all values as of October 1 of the pre-tax year, for next year, okay? So right now, you're assessed as an affordable unit, right? I would assume that your assessment would remain the same, right?
Not go up. It's not low.
No. If the question would be, what would your assessment be if you kept the deed restriction on it? You got one on there now, right? You got an assessment as a deed restricted unit. It's not October 1st, right? Not yet. So Ed can answer the question, but I believe the answer would be that your taxes would remain exactly the way they are right now. Plus or minus a couple bucks, because everybody's goes up a little bit. But you would still get the assessed value as a deed restricted affordable unit.
And that's the way it's going to remain?
Yes, as long as you're deed restricted and you extend those restrictions.
No, I'm talking about the other, not the restriction.
Not the restriction.
Yeah.
So if you're,
1.39.
if your restriction's gone away,
Yeah.
and you want to be able to sell or have a house that's fair market value, right? Ed said earlier that as of October 1 of this year, he would estimate what the fair market value is of your home. He would adjust your taxes.
Correct. That's just not now. Sell at market value or rent.
Right, you can do anything you want with it, but you're going to pay like the other times.
Correct.
All right.
But we have to make that decision.
There's no deadline. We would work with you. If you contacted Sharon tomorrow and said that you were interested in extending the restrictions, we would work with you on that. There's no hard and fast deadline.
So that I know what that is.
Here you go. Excuse me, can we, whoa. We can't hear a thing if everybody's talking. So if you let Ed answer the question, well, everybody will get a chance to answer a question, okay?
I think I can answer this gentleman's question over to the left of me. If you look at the handout that says on the top, Parkside neighborhood. And I didn't forget Portland, they're on the second page. So I have both neighborhoods. The first two pages are, if we read the first one, where it says Model A on Parkside, I did the same analysis for Parkside as I did for Portland. The low and moderate assessments in Parkside in 2019 ranged from 50,000 to 118,300, with an average of about 89,500. I listed below the taxes presently for an A model. I listed the range where you see lower and upper, which is the 50,000 and the 118,000 assessed value, and you can see the taxes to the right of that. The lower range is $690, the upper range is $1,632.54, and the average of that, or the average of those two numbers, is $1,235.10. So that's an estimate of what an A model's taxes would be in the upper range, the lower, and the average. I also did the same thing for the B models. The B models ranged from a low of 74,000 in assessment to a high of 140,000 in assessment, with an average of 113,300. If you look below where that little chart is, the taxes for the lower part of the range, which would be 74,000, is 1,021. For the upper, it's 1,932, and for the average, it's 1,570. I'm rounding numbers, I'm not giving you the pennies. I also did this for the C's and the D's, the same thing. The C models, whoever the heck wants C models, the low is 89,000, and the high is 166, which I forgot to mention. The reason there is a high and a low, because all of these numbers were based on income when they were originally purchased. So they're not always, each assessment is different based on the individual's income.
Then and now.
Then and now, correct. No, then when you bought it, and then there's an indexing of the assessment. I indexed the assessment over the course of time. So if somebody bought a unit, 25 years ago, that was indexed up to current in 2019. And I do that every year. I index the assessments. In some years, we had 5 or 6 years where there was zero increase because the state said that there was no increase at all. So for the C models, the lower range in value, which I said was $89,200, the taxes are approximately $1,230.96. The upper range, $2,290, and the average of the C models is $1,806. The D's range from $120,000 to $120,800 to $188,000, with the average being $161,500. If you look at the lower range at 120, the taxes are $1,667. The upper, it's $2,594, and the average of the D is $2,228. Now, I've also done the same analysis with Cortland on the second page. The second page is basically I did the same thing, A, B, C, D. The Cortland models range from a low of 66,300 to a high of 109,900, with an average of 88,200. The taxes for the low are 914,000, with an assessment of 66,300. The upper, meaning the assessment at 109,900, is 1,516, and the average of 88,000 is 1,217. Also, the B models, the lowest is 89,800, the upper range is 141,300, and the average is 114,200. The taxes range, the low range is $1,239, the upper is $1,949, and the average is $1,575. I also did the same thing with the Cs and the Ds. The Cs range from 89,400 to a high of 184,700 with an average of 142,200. The lower range is 89,400, the taxes would be 1,233. The upper range, the taxes would be 2,548, and the mean is 1962. For those that own the D models, the low is 103,200 with a high of 194, with an average of about 166,400. So the low range of the lower end of the range is 103,200. The taxes are 1424. The upper range is 2677, and the average is 2296. So that gives you an idea of what people are paying in both Cortland and Parkside based on the low, the high, and the average. Now, before I answer your questions, I just have one thing. I just want to go over this one page, and I'll answer all your questions. I really promise I will do that. If you look at the third page, which is both Parkside and Cortland estimates, I also handed out the sales sheet, but I'll get to that in a little bit. I used a lot of the data that was, of course, from Parkside because we had, just as everyone talked about, there's 23 sales or 24 sales that we have that since the deed restriction was removed in August of 2017. We basically have two types of units of homes in Parkside, and I'm assuming in Cortland. I came out to Parkside to inspect all the properties. I don't know if you remember me. I was going to a lot of the homes in Cortland, as well as my assistant Bob Gabrish, and we were out looking at all those homes. And what I've done is categorized it to make it simple into two categories. So if you look at the A model on the third page, there is two types of units: a renovated unit and an original unit. Now, what I mean by original is there could be some replacements that were made. People would replace a hot water heater or do the general maintenance items. In a renovated, you can have different types of renovation. You can have a total renovation or a partial renovation. But for the purposes of this analysis, I categorized it into two categories, and a renovated unit and an original unit. Now, your question was, what would your taxes be? The A model, renovated, is $167,700 in the tax books as we speak today. The tax rate is only an estimate. I used $1.38, and the taxes are $2,314.26. For an original unit, meaning like maybe the kitchen cabinets weren't replaced, the countertops might have not been replaced, but it's in good condition. The assessment is $149,200. The taxes are $2,058.96. So that's the difference between the two that you're seeing within an A model. The B model, and you probably have your postcards at home that were mailed to you in February of 2019, and these numbers would be on those cards. The renovated unit for a B model is assessed at $185,300 with the taxes estimated at $2,557. For an original, the assessment is $148 for a total of $2,042. The C model would be assessed at renovated at $211,200, original at $186,600. The renovated taxes are for the C model is $29.14, for the original $25.75, and for the D model renovated is assessed at $272,700, and the original at $241,800. Taxes for the renovated are $37.63, and the original condition is $33.36. So if you're comparing, if you're looking at this analysis, and you looked at the first 2 pages, and you found a unit, whether it is a Parkside B, or it is a Cortland A, you can kind of figure out what your taxes are tonight, or go home and look at your tax bill from last year, kind of figure out what your taxes are. I think the people in Cortland, we don't know yet because they haven't been assessed at market value. So you could use this as an estimate of what your taxes would be in comparison to what you're paying now. If you subtract one from the other, you'll see what the increase in taxes will be.
Ed, just to clarify, this third page is unrestricted?
Yes.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes, these are unrestricted. These third page, I'm sorry, thank you, Mayor. This third page is market value unrestricted.
Ed, let me ask you another question. If, with the 20% recapture fee, should those market values for tax purposes be reduced by 20% to account for the recapture fee? Because if that's, it's not truly reflective of market value to the unit owner, because the unit owner still has a 20% obligation back to BHHC. So there, it seems to me that 20% should be reflected as a matter of what fair market value would be. I understand that that's not the transaction price,
Right.
but the value to the unit owner, that would seem to be the appropriate value.
Because if we're going to have to pay that recapture fee until whenever, we're paying taxes until whenever. So,
Well, according to assessing practices, we're supposed to be assessing at market value. It doesn't involve the recapture rule when it comes to assessing. It's basically the market value of your property and what you can sell it for.
Is there any further guidance on that? I mean, I know the only other guidance that is out there is the 95.5 rule. But this seems to me is the unit owner isn't really, if a unit unrestricted is going to sell at 200,000, the unit owner's not going to realize 200,000. Maybe they'll realize, 160, right? So isn't that a more equitable basis for assessing fair market value? Is there any other guidance on that, or something that tax assessors can look to on that?
Well, this is to the best of my knowledge, this is the first neighborhood or development that is where the restrictions have expired. And it's an interpretation of, as assessors, we're supposed to assess at market value. And when I assessed at market value based on the sales prices. I did not go through the calculations of adjusting them for the recapture rule. I basically took the assessments, and you'll see the other pages that I gave you. I listed all the sales of the A's, the B's, and the C's, and that's how I calculated the assessments on each of these. Basically, our assessing practices are said that we are assessed at market value. You know, what, if somebody...
This is not about you, what the mayor's trying to say is not about you. This is about the recapture fee being taken, the tax...
Did I take it into consideration then?
I just wanted to ask you, when you were talking about this high-low thing, in 2017, when we got our first index card, my taxes went up from like $650 a year, my goodness, to like $2,300. So I called the tax office just to find out where that number came from. This is 2 years ago.
Right.
And I have a Model B.
A Model B Parkside?
Yes, Parkside, sir. And I was assessed at $173,000. So that's why my taxes were assessed at $2,300. So I'm like, oh, and so, I mean, you're telling me that my condo's worth 173,000. Yeah, you know, I wasn't upset or anything, I was just trying to find out where the increase was. Now, and it's not renovated, it's not updated, and I'm looking at your numbers here, and I just maybe need a little better of an explanation, not now, maybe with you,
Okay.
about that. I think what the mayor's trying to say is something that's not even in your ballpark, it's in their ballpark. In the sense of, you know, with this 20% recapture fee, you know, maybe that, something should be reduced on that, because we're getting, our taxes should be taken down. If we're gonna have to pay $40,000 on a $200,000 unit, well, we're only seeing $160,000, so that's all we should be getting, because you're getting your money. And we're paying tax on it.
They're getting it, right?
It's like being double taxed. So even that's another problem with this thing. And I understand it's a first-time thing. You screwed up. You're not gonna do it in Portland or with Village Green, because we're the example now. And we're the ones gonna have to pay for this when other people didn't. So my opinion, or what I would do is,
We should be
first
grandfathered
generation,
in and not
just
have
let
to
it
pay the
go.
20%.
Not the
Or at least
20%. Let it go,
negotiate a
because you
different
screwed up for
percentage.
it.
Negotiated lower percentage.
Negotiate a
Lower the
different
percentage
percentage
again.
with us.
For the first
Because we're
generation,
never gonna get that.
or 5%, yes, okay.
That money
I
is
shouldn't
gone.
get anything.
They won't
No.
use
This is
that
not
money.
you.
They were under the
We're never getting that money.
Open the law.
It's not fair to us. It's not fair to us. It's the first step. And now you guys are turning off. Figure out what
That was, yes.
Well,
I think we compensated
I think
ourselves.
the issue is, but which I'd like to go back to what the mayor said, is that, you know, I'm assessing at market value, you know, which is what I was assessing at for each of the units, and I'll be doing that for, God willing, and for Cortland and the other developments that will be expiring in the future. But to calculate a recapture fee off an assessment is, in my opinion, it's not reflective of a sale price, and that's what we're doing. We're reflecting of a sale price. It's really, one has nothing to do with the other, in my opinion.
Well,
yes, it does.
is there a state assessment board or some other body you can turn to for guidance on this? If fair market value is not necessarily truly reflective of the value to the owner, there should be someone you can go to, say, this is a case of first impression, how do we address this?
Well, in answer to the mayor's question, yes, I can go to the Division of Taxation, which is located in Trenton, talk to the director of the Division of Taxation, who's in charge of all taxation, and her name is Patty Wright, and I can talk to Patty to find out her opinion, you know, regarding this matter.
Well, I'd like you to do that, please, Ed.
Yes.
And with your tax assessment, we have blackouts. JCP&L has junction stations that are all apart, overhead wires being knocked out by trees on Route 206. Then you've got lamp poles with bare wires that do not have conduit protection shields. I mean, we have blackouts, we can't have backup generators. People are not going to buy our units if our neighborhoods are exposed to that kind of issues. They get higher taxes than us.
And the problem. They actually are, it's their transacting.
The question is about power outage.
They're transacting.
There are bare wires on those manholes. I don't say they don't have shields. But I hear our business not in place.
Well, you're talking about the whole development. Yes. Well, that's not, that's a good question, but it's not pertinent to what we're talking about tonight. Someone else have a question?
Yes, I have a question for Ed. The covenant you referenced earlier about recording and notifying dealers of the recapture deed. When was that filed?
March 27th.
2019?
Yes.
So
Right here.
after the notice, not so 2 years ago?
No, it was filed March 27th.
Okay, so it should have been reported 2 years ago when the deed
No,
was filed, correct?
legally, no. These documents have been recorded for 30 years. We didn't put anything new in this covenant other than...
Why not, why didn't you report time when the deed control expired?
Pardon me?
Why not report at that time?
When?
At the same time with the master deed? Why report it now? Why report it now? Or even
Well,
when the
because
deed control
we
expired?
recorded it now because obviously title companies and people selling the units were not reading the book. And they were not telling us when they were closing. So we decided we would file a special covenant.
But what's the reason for not sending that letter earlier? Why not send it 18 months ago? Why should we send a letter advising you about the...
Well, because we realized, candidly, that Cortland was going to expire on the 7th of April. We knew there was confusion about this. We didn't want to go through it all over again with Cortland. We had to address Parkside. The covenant, which is the exact language which comes out of the master deed, was recorded to put everybody on notice going forward that there's this obligation.
Then why should Parkside suffer from that oversight of the HHC? That's your...
The oversight
that's your
was
job,
that
to make sure
that
we have
whoever
the
looked at the title for the sales that took place, the 23 sales, didn't bother to pick up what the master deed, not what the town says, not what the master deed says. And therefore, we didn't know anything about
That's
it.
not our master deed.
It's somebody's job when they sell the property.
That's your job, to send out that letter much earlier.
There's nothing in the master deed that assigns the obligation to VHHC to do
Those
that.
other people are not gonna pay, why should it be?
You really
Those
urge,
other people, you're never gonna get that money back.
you really
We'll-
urge.
We shouldn't have to
We'll make
pay.
every effort to get everyone who's...
You're not gonna get the money. That's a joke, you're not gonna get
I
it.
got bridges like,
We really urge
You're never gonna get it.
to reconsider Parkside paying that fee. We really urge you to reconsider paying that fee or paying a much lesser fee.
Parkside.
We, to do that, we would have to amend your master deed.
Why
and
not?
that's what we should do.
No, we don't, it's not our master deed, it's your master deed.
Well, then that's what we should do.
It might,
Let the trustee.
it was required, the affordable housing section of the master deed in all 4 communities were required by the court when Bedminster settled up all of its affordable housing obligations in the 70s and the 80s. That's where the language came from. There's a whole section dealing with restrictions involving affordable housing units in the 4 communities. So if you wanted to amend it, I would suggest you probably have to go back to court, get relief from that condition, and say that we don't want to contribute some of the equity back to the affordable housing program, and we'll see as a matter of public policy what Judge Miller does with that.
I mean, the township or the mayor can help out and assist in this in any way that they can. Because it just is a little bit unfair, it's very unjust that some unit owners have to pay this recapture fee 2 years later when others don't. And nobody's grandfathered in. The covenant that was recorded does not grandfather even 23 units in. So why should it apply to these Parkside unit owners now? And people make decisions, it's not a couple $100 as you said, it's thousands of dollars. And people make decisions on their financial ability, when they're gonna sell, how much they're gonna sell, based on these types of fees. And now they're going to have to rethink their entire financial situation based on this new recapture fee 2 years later, when certain unit owners are not going to even have to pay for this? That's not fair. And something should be done about that, whether it's negotiating a lower fee or not having it apply to Parkside at all. Because, as he said, they're an experiment. And why should they have to suffer from their oversight, from VHC's oversight? That's their job. I understand that it's not their obligation to provide notice about the provisions of the master deed. I understand that. But it is their obligation to get the recapture fee and to do what the master deed does and what it says. And they fail to do that. Section 7.02 here says the resale recapture amount shall be calculated by the nonprofit corporation VHC within a period before the resale of a condominium unit. They failed to do that, almost 23 units. So why should now they should suffer from that oversight? Something should be done. We really urge the VHC, and if the township can do anything to help, to reconsider imposing that fee on these unit owners now.
Yes, ma'am.
I have several questions. You want me to ask them all at once, or you want me to ask them one at a time?
Let him go.
All right. So, The one thing I want to know is, I know that you say that the money from the recapture fee goes into a trust fund.
Correct.
And where does it go from there? Because several years ago, when we were undergoing projects in Parkside, they were talking about assessing for projects. I reached out to COA, and at that time, Bedminster was sitting on over $1.2 million. Now, they haven't built anything new, and with the exception of the $31,000 they gave us to finish our finish our outside stairs, they give small grants to 2 other communities, you're still sitting on over $1 million. And interest has accrued. So now, I can see if you were looking for a smaller percentage to kick back in, because I'm grateful for having lived in this community and my child went to school here. I think it's great. However, 20% is just beyond greedy. But you're talking that could be $20,000, $30,000, whereas under the restrictions, BHHC would have gotten $3,000, $4,000. So now you're going to be gaining millions of dollars. Where's that going? Are you building more in Bedminster? Because where? There's no land here to build. So what are you doing with that money?
Well, I guess I can defer to the mayor. I mean, clearly the town has just signed up for a new obligation through the year 2025. I would assume there's going to be expenditures in order to address the obligation going forward, whether it's extending deed restrictions, providing down payment assistance, another round of condominium improvement loans. There are things that are built into the program that the court has approved, and now I think the town is in the process of implementing that plan. But the answer is, the money is not going to the general purpose. The money is going back into affordable housing.
Right, but in Bedminster.
In Bedminster.
We're not building anything new.
Well, I don't know, but there may be.
And none of the money's coming back to any of the communities.
There's an obligation for 28 units. There's an obligation for 28 units. There's an obligation for 28 units by 2022. 2022? No.
And where are they gonna go?
The extension was 2025, but by 2022, we have to have new units either constructed or zoned for. So within the next couple of years, well, that's something that the planning board is going to be looking at, to zone for 28 additional affordable housing units, or to actually have them constructed. Additionally, to keep the affordable housing program, to keep it going, to keep doing the down payment assistance, to keep doing the rental assistance, to keep doing the other programs that BHHC is implementing, that money comes back into the town affordable housing program. We give the money back to BHHC to be redeployed back to the affordable housing units. So the obligation from the township is to keep a vibrant affordable housing program in place for those who need it.
Well, good God, when you take 20% back, we're all gonna end up right back in affordable housing.
That's right.
I mean, and your offer for lowering the taxes by 20% was a nice gesture, but you're talking that's $400 a year, I'm gonna say, versus the $20,000 you want from me. It's apples to oranges. It's really not fair. It's excessive. 20% is excessive on market.
People don't have that much money just lying around. I don't know about you.
But it's not a dollar figure that gets paid, right? That's not something that they're paying now. It's based upon that first market transaction. And what Ed indicated earlier, when you asked about when was that deed covenant filed, well, deed covenant was filed in 1987 or 1989.
No, it's March 27.
No, that's when you filed the notice of it. But when the master deed was filed, that covenant was already in place.
Right.
So it's not a new covenant. If you think this is a new covenant, that's wrong. And I think at one point you admitted, or you indicated that this is an outstanding obligation.
That's, you need that when it was on through. No one reads what they read, like you just said. Now, all of a sudden, we're not informed on the market value, 20%. We were asked to either sign off or continue. We had no information about that. The 23 people walked away without paying.
You're never gonna get that money from those 23.
And so that's what our problem is right now. That's the deal.
And the instructions to BHHC are to go after those other unit owners. And whatever means they need to do, BHHC is,
And that's going to
BHC is,
fees of the money that's sitting in the
but it's not going to, that doesn't affect the prospective obligations. or the current obligations. That's going after the people that didn't pay, that BHHC is going to chase. That doesn't change the language in the deed.
But you can't get blood from a stone. If they've already invested their money in their new home.
I'm sorry, were you done your questions?
No.
Okay. Next.
No, I was not. So you had talked about the improvements and that they could be deducted, but it seems like if they're more than 2 years old, we're not going to get ditto for that.
I mean, like the new washer, dryer, yeah, there's a straight line 10-year depreciation. So if they're 2 years old, you get 20% off, 30%, and so on. So whatever age your improvements are, if they're brand new improvements, you get 100% of that.
Well, that's the other thing. So a lot of people, knowing that they were going to be able to sell their unit at market value, a lot of people have put major improvements into their home. They've made major investments into this. Yeah, not washing machines and dishwashers and refrigerators. We're talking brand new kitchens, windows, flooring, things like that. Yeah, people put a significant amount of money into their place so that they can get a greater profit. They're giving that profit to the BHHC.
Yeah,
Had we known, if I have my letter dated here, August 1, 2017, had it said here, you're still responsible for the 20% recapture, I would have said, well, maybe I'm not going to fix all this stuff because maybe I'm not going to make the profit.
Well, I think clearly we can be flexible. We can give you the credit for, in other words, build up the basis as high as we can for improvements you made to your property. We normally have a selected number when we do an affordable sale, but I think we could certainly be more expansive. So if you came and said you spent $25,000 renovating and upgrading your property, I think we could clearly work with you to add that to the basis of your house to get closer to the price you sold.
Well, and the other thing is, in Parkside, we have done major renovations and improvements to the community. We've done so many things that I'm sure that's helping to increase the value of these units. And those improvements are coming out of our pocket. We've paid that with our association fees. So all that money that we've invested, it's helping the sale price, which is just putting more money in the pocket of the BHHC.
Well, it's also putting more money in your pocket. We're taking a percentage of that, that's all.
So there's restricted units.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
The people who did not pay, okay, does the township or agency plan on putting a lien on the property?
No, it's owned by somebody else now. We will contact, and we are in touch.
When, say, maybe next door she sold, bought a new home, are you planning on getting that money by placing a lien on that property?
On the seller's new property? No, that would not be legal. Until or unless we get a judgment, we don't intend to do that. So what we're doing is, we have the list, we have the forwarding, we know where the 24 people went. We have addresses for the 24 people who went. So we have already contacted, we're in the process of contacting them and telling them that they need to get in touch with us to resolve this issue.
Well,
And I've heard from 3 or so, and everyone I've heard from...
On that, you're making a legal determination that you're not there yet. Because just as you said, the obligation may still run, right? The obligation is not relieved until it's satisfied.
Right.
So,
It's on the guy's...
I would just, I don't know that I would go there yet.
Well, if we're trying to get paid, I've heard from 3 people we've already contacted, and I'm going to hear from 3 title insurance companies that represented the buyers in the deal, to have them explain why they didn't pick up the deed restriction. And they may be on the hook for the money.
So it's still not coming from the person.
No, if it doesn't come from, if the person relied upon that title report, and then the legal obligation may be with the title company. They may split it with the person, I don't care what they do, as long as they
I
pay.
just don't want to admit that you're 2 years late in the game on doing this, and that's what you were. You're 2 years late on doing this. This information should have been provided to Parkside when the letter went out telling us that we were going market value. It should have been put in there that we should have been told that for the first sale, he was still restricted to paying 20% recapture fee. People would have made different decisions than they did. We would have calculated all that in. Now 23,000 people went by already, which you're gonna have
And
a
some
hard
are under
time.
contract.
I knew that, some are under contract and have their money spent already, they can't get out of their stuff because they're so close to closing. And then you're gonna put the squeeze on them to get this money out after they've already made these decisions based on not knowing this. It's very, like, one of our attorneys saying, it's unfair to the community that you're gonna penalize some so that others walk free. And that's what's
I
happening.
understand what you're
It's the
saying.
DHC's self-enforced from the day one.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm referring to page 12 of the handout. You'll like part of it.
No. She's speaking.
Okay, sorry.
Page 12 of the handout. What do you mean by, can you elaborate on partial exemption from fee, age 62 or older, on page 12?
Well, when you sell a piece of property in New Jersey, you have to pay a realty transfer tax. The illustration we took did not assume you were a senior. If you're a senior, you pay a lesser tax. So all that was an illustration of somebody paying the full freight, the full realty transfer fee. If you're a senior over 62 years of age, you don't pay here, you pay a little bit less. So that's all that was. That's all. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you had said that the 20% was going to go to further low income. Can you tell me how many people have re-signed up for low income in Parkside and in Portland and so forth?
You know, Sharon?
How many people have signed up?
Re-signed up.
Oh, to extend their deeds?
Yes.
In Parkside, Ed, we prepared about 4 or 5 deeds.
4 or 5.
And then, yeah, and then we have other folks who I've met with, and I think I have 1, 2, 3, I have 4 more that want to extend their deeds.
In Portland?
They're mixed.
So you have
When did you find out? When did you find out about all that? Because obviously.
Well, some
you wouldn't have the
people,
information.
some people extended their deeds when they found out about the taxes going up, and they, felt that that's their home forever, so they wanted to continue paying the lower taxes. So we extended some deeds then, and I have about four people right now that I've spoken with, and they intend to stay also, and we're going to extend their deeds.
How do they know?
Wait a minute, I'm still answering your question.
So are you going to send a
Good
letter?
question. It's a
Are
good
you going to
question.
send a letter out to everybody telling them what their estimated tax rate will be and what the cutoff date is for extending into low-income families?
Well, that would be the assessor's office. I don't get involved in taxes.
If your deed restrictions in Cortland just expired,
Exactly.
not even a month ago.
Right. Did a letter go to? But do we have a lot? Do we have
There's a letter that says we want to extend the deed restriction, we'd be happy to work with you.
Your letter?
So all you need to do is contact, excuse me, please. I'm trying to answer this lady's question. All you would have to do, if you're interested in exploring extending the deed restriction, is to give Sharon a call, talk to her about what's involved in doing that. Ed already gave you an estimate about where your taxes, and your taxes basically would stay the same, because you're already affording, you're assessed at an affordable level right now.
And you definitely don't have to be reassessed on the wages and how many people live in.
Well, we'll have to take a look at that. We're going to have to take a look at that. But we'll be as flexible as we can, because we're anxious to have as many units remain in the program as possible. We need the housing.
And it has to be 30 years. It can't be
30 years,
10
has to be
years.
30 years. The fair share housing people pushed us for 50 years, and we said no, 30 years. Yes, sir, on the back.
What's going to happen to the entities that have the apartments in Portland Parkside? Are they going to stay deed restricted, or are they going to go market value?
Those are apartment units.
Yes.
They're not subject to the master deed, so they're going to go to market. And they're going to rent them to market people, and that's what they're doing right now.
But again, there's a difference.
So they don't have to see the recapture fee then.
They're not selling anything.
What if they decide to sell?
If they're subject to the master deed, they got to pay it. If they're not, they're not. Yes, ma'am.
My final question, for me anyway, is this. Now that this information has been communicated to everybody about the 20% capture fee, and the mayor has asked Mr. Kerwin to find out in Trenton whether or not the 20% can be based less minus that.
Right.
How much time would you give us to reconsider going back to low-income housing?
Are you Parkside?
Yes.
Come in and talk to Sharon anytime right now. There's no window.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's going to take quite a while before Mr. Kerwin finds out from the state whether or not he can base our taxes on what we're actually going to be getting from them after the recapture fee.
I think we'll find out pretty quickly.
So I just wanted to know, like, can you give us an extension of time, Sharon, to let us decide?
Well, I would want to check with Mr. Kerwin on that
Right,
to
after
see.
he's found out.
Yeah,
So
and then, you'll come in and give me your information, and we'll have a new deed drawn up, and you'll
Will you
come.
let us know when we find out from
Sure,
Mr. Kerwin?
sure, just give me your name and phone number.
Okay.
No, but everybody has to know.
Yeah, everybody, yeah. You should have noticed that once you find out from Mr. Kerwin.
Yeah, we can notice everybody.
Everybody?
Sure.
Ed, on that point, I mean, you know, you've got about 50 people here. Do you have emails? We have,
No, we didn't sign in.
so can we set, Judy, is Judy still here? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? Can we do a sign in so we get people's, if you prefer email or text?
Here, Judy. Somebody, yes, sir. Please, can you keep it down so we can hear the gentleman?
As far as the flag laws, I know I have books under my bed, but is there additional copies somewhere where I can go online and research it?
You can contact the Somerset County Clerk. We can give you the book and page and when it was recorded, and you can get a copy from the clerk, or you could just go down to Somerville if you wanted to, and go in, and the information, did you get the handout from Portland and Parkside we gave you tonight?
Yes.
All right, so on these, questions, well, we got questions. Why do we get questions? If you go down,
Ed, shouldn't the master, or not the master, shouldn't the association have the master deed?
well, they should.
Here in Parkside, it is on the website.
It's on the website, okay. And there's Parkside. You have the information there about when the master deed was executed, recorded, deed and paid. So if you want to go down, if you want, you can go
I
on.
understand all that. What I'm saying is just, it's 2019, I figured there might be a copy somewhere, and
It's on the
something like there,
website.
so.
Parkside website.
Okay, the second question is, if we re-up, let's just say, we re-up for another 30 years, we're gonna go to 95.5.
No, you're always governed by this document. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Sharon. I'm from Cortland. It says we have until August to decide if we're going to go market value or sign on for 30 more years.
Well, when I spoke with the tax assessor, I did briefly ask him that question, and he said, if you let me know by August, who's going to extend their deeds, then that would be the time frame. But I can talk to him again, since the mayor proposed this question for Ed to talk to Trenton about, and see what the very last date would be, because you'll have to make a decision. Oh, there's Ed now.
But that question is not really an Ed question. That question is about putting it back into affordability restrictions. The idea, I believe your conversation with Ed was relevant to missing the 2019 reassessment, which is a little bit different than re-upping into the affordability restrictions past August, in September or October or a year from now. So that's your question, is that a hard deadline to get back into the affordability restrictions? And that's really, Ed, your question.
Yeah, the answer is there's no hard deadline. I would use August 1st. I think, Ed, if somebody was to get back into the program before August 1st, you have plenty of time to readjust their assessment for the tax rolls for next year, right? August 1st?
Yes, well, technically, it would have to be before October 1st, by statute, because anything, it's when we assess, it's like the town stops October 1st, everything just stops, and I have to assess it as of that day, what it looks like as of that day. And if the restriction is, you place back on the property before October 1st, of course, then it would be assessed at a lower number and the taxes would be adjusted appropriately.
So I think mechanically, we would ask that if you're thinking about it this summer, I would try to have you come to a conclusion on or about August 1st to be safe, so that we could then go through the mechanics of the deed restriction extension, get it recorded, give it to Ed, and then he has a basis for adjusting the taxes. Yes, ma'am?
Right. I was told that Portland got the letter, and it said about 20%. Why did Parkside get that same letter, talking about the 20%? How was it fair to us to pay 20% when what you stated in that letter when we went to the...
You said a letter, but it didn't say anything about any 20%. It didn't? No. Well, somebody else said that.
Well, again, the 20% does not come from any township or VHAC document, right? Not our 20%.
I understand that, but you should have been
Not our document.
informed when we went up to Fairmont.
We have the documents now, and so the answer is, that's why you didn't get the notice, because it wasn't our responsibility to give you the notice.
Well, just a second, did the letter go to the 26th chapter fee or not? Did the letter?
The most recent letter to Cortland, did it mention the recapture fee? Yes.
The one that we just
The one on the 22nd, yeah.
Last week.
It did?
I believe it did. We can check it.
The most recent letter you received before your expiration says there's a 20% recapture fee when you sell.
Okay, why doesn't it say on Parkside?
Right, because it came to our attention that there were 23 people on Parkside. No. It came to our attention that people in Parkside who had sold had not followed the master deed. We didn't want to repeat the problem, so we got
Whose job is it to enforce that to get the recapture fee? Should that be
it's the owner's job to follow the law. That's what that book says.
So you should have a monitoring system that should be overseen, that every single unit is being, that you are obtaining the recapture, even the units that are being sold. That's the That's your job, to monitor, actually having you do that.
We learned that people were not reading the book, and therefore we included that in the notice.
Did you read the book?
Did I read it?
Did you read the book?
I read the book.
Yeah. Right.
Everybody shush.
You said that book extension would be another 30 years.
Right. Pardon me?
Is that written extension, one extension?
No, it's written in our approved affordable housing program. Under our program through 2025, if the town is supposed to count your unit like it does now as an affordable housing unit, that's at a minimum of the 30-year deed restriction.
So that's.
Can we get a copy of that?
I'm not a lawyer, so I know that every time that they write a law, you can actually do amendments. Is there any way that they can do the amendments to the 20%?
This is your law, right? It's
It's our law, I want to change it. Yes. As the group, can we go to court and have it amended?
Well, yes, I would think that if you wanted to amend and get rid of that obligation, okay, which is in your master deed, you would have to go to court. Why? Because the master deeds, all the master deeds for the 4 communities, were all part of the original workout of the affordable housing program in the 70s and the 80s. And that section of the master deed, which has all the stuff about affordable housing units and the requirements, was given to us by the courts. So I don't think you can unilaterally take a vote in the community and say, we want to get rid of that section, 10 and 7 of the master deed, so we don't have to pay the 20%. You would have to go to court to have Judge Miller or somebody say, sure, you can do an amendment process, and in the rest of the book it tells you how to amend your master deed, and you can go through a process to try to amend your master deed to get rid of that. But we would be there to say, but it's required 30 years ago, it's supposed to be a sharing of the profit that goes back into the program, and that ought to occur. And we'll let the judge decide.
Thank you. That helps to walk us backwards.
I'm more than happy to state,
Isn't, aren't all these affordable housing
units under Mount Laurel, which was established through the state, aren't there state rules that can help us? Yes.
Well, you're lucky that there is not a state rule, because there was a decision in South Brunswick about 3 or 4 years ago, where South Brunswick was arguing that stuff like the 95-5 rule, meaning we get 95% of your profit, you get 5, should be retroactively applied to communities that had different regulations. And the court said, no, you can't do that. Whatever your regulations are in your master deed, you're governed by those, because presumably you're supposed to know what they are and you rely on them. So you're lucky that you don't have a state that does that.
But I'm referring to as far as guidance. So from the state, when all this was established, I remember when this rule was being, Mount Laurel housing was being established 30 some odd years ago. So I guess we go to court.
That's right, we go to court. Hallelujah, we're done.
Yes, ma'am.
Who governs the BHHC?
Who governs the BHHC?
Right, so who
There's a board of
who
directors.
governs you?
They're representatives
to make
from
sure that
every
you're making
community.
the right rules, or that you're following the right rules, or you're enforcing the right rules? Who governs you?
Well, BHHC has a certificate of incorporation, has purpose, it tells you what you're supposed to do, the bylaws. They're representatives of every community on that board, and that's what governs BHHC.
So there's no state division or anything that governs the BHHC? Because what I'm not understanding is, you know, one, how Parkside was not notified, how 23 units sold, how you can now go back to those unit owners or people that were already under contract when they found out about this. Those, you know, your decisions would have been different. You can't humanly say that they would not have been different if we had known this prior to.
Right.
And now we're stuck with this. But what I'm not understanding is legally, how can you then, 18 months have gone by of Parkside units being market value and paying market value taxes, but then you're saying, well, you can come to Karen and re-sign your unit. How would you not have to re-qualify those unit owners? That makes absolutely no sense. That's your rules.
Well,
That your rules are that you have to qualify to live in affordable housing. So if I've gone market value for 18 months, and you're telling me I can sell my unit at market value, how can you then say that I can now just give you my key for another 30 years, but I wouldn't have to re-qualify to live there?
Well, the answer is this. There probably is no precedent running around about how that would work. In other words, you had lived in an affordable housing unit, right? That was deeds restricted for 30 years, right? You didn't have information, which you should have had, and therefore you made a decision to go market. Now you found out some information, and you may be interested in coming back into the
You have
program.
information that you did not provide in your letter.
However, you didn't have the information now, and you might want to get back into the program, okay? I don't think, in terms of the manual, of what's called the UHAG manual, Uniform Housing Affordability Control Manual, that talks about qualifying people, ever addressed a situation where somebody was in affordable housing, they came out of affordable housing, they know more about that situation now, and they like to get back into the affordable
So that's
housing.
almost like a new.
Whether we have to requalify you or not is something we can look into. I would say that in fairness to you and to the town, if we could get that unit as an extended unit for 30 years, we can figure out a way to get you back in the program. I
So
think we
then how
can do
can you
that.
not figure out a way to fix your mistake? Exactly. How can you not figure out a way to say, to the 23 unit owners who sold and those who are already under contract who may have made different decisions? I'm one of those people. I'm under contract to sell my unit right now. I'm closing in May. My decision may have been very, very different had I known about this. And now I'm in a financial position that I may not be able to be in. And I don't have a choice. I wasn't given that choice. So how can you not, if you can say you can go back and look at that to re-qualify me, how can you not go back and look at that?
Well,
Because those two, you're contradicting yourself.
that's your opinion. Yes, ma'am.
Hold on, you didn't answer the answer. You did not answer the question. Answer the question.
What's the question? The question was, well, first of all, you were indicating that I thought you were indicating that you might be interested in getting back in the program. Obviously, that's not the case. You got your unit sold for market, right?
Right.
So,
And had I known that,
what's-
in 2017, my decisions may have been different. I'm now under contract for a house that may not even be in a financial position to buy if I have to give you $20,000, $30,000 of my money. And I may have made a different decision. Those 23 people before me may have made a different decision. They may still be living in Parkside.
Again, it's not our regulation, it's the
And I get that,
community's
it was your responsibility to let us know that.
Well,
It was your responsibility to get the Recapture.
I understand your position, but there's no answer to that. I understand your position.
There is an answer to it. There is an answer to it. Just admit that
We
you
can't
someone that
change, we
is
can't
not
change
here
what the
dropped.
Mr. D says. It's
Just
not our,
admit that someone here dropped the ball.
It's not
There is
our
an answer
Mr.
to it.
D.
There's an answer to it, you're just not giving it.
no. That's what the law says.
You're not you should be monitoring, you should have people that are working there that
We
make sure
can't
that
change the
these-
master deed. Whether you do it or you didn't. You can't change the
They were notified, we weren't. It's not fair.
So you're next.
Does the municipality receive government funds or grants for having affordable housing, and if they do, how much a year?
The answer is no.
Didn't they say they got grant funds?
Yes, ma'am. But the communities were given grants by the township for improvements in the communities, the 4 communities.
Years ago, COA had told me that if a town maintained a certain number of units, they were given federal funding. If they didn't maintain those units, those funds would be
There's no more
taken back.
COA has been around for 10 years. Yes, ma'am.
When we talk and you have affordable housing compared to the market, there's still a $40,000 to $50,000 difference in selling your home on open market versus going through affordable housing. You have to take into consideration, if you're going to re-sign up for 30 years, you're going to lose that extra 30 to 40,000, and you're talking 20%, so $8,000. You're still better off paying the extra $1,000 for taxes, because that's going to take you like almost 60 years to catch up to even that.
I understand
You
the
got to
position.
remember what you're losing by re-signing up.
Yes, sir.
Are there any infrastructure issues that we need to be aware of, so when we sell our units in the future, or if we go to extended controls on our units, that we might have to be aware of with regards to state laws on the piping, the electrical units, or any other issues in regard to the function of the building? Anything that we need to know about?
Well, when you sell your unit, a buyer is probably going to ask you to produce all of the construction certificates, electrical, plumbing, and anything that you had done in the unit to make sure that that was done right and they're closed out. That's the only requirement. You don't have to upgrade things, you don't have to come up with special codes or anything else. You just have to prove that everything you did there, you did legally. So the answer is no.
Nothing with the piping or the plumbing or anything like that, that we should be concerned about with the streets or the, I know we have problems with the electrical grid with the power lines coming in and then the underground lines not being protected with conduits and shielding. I mean, that's why I wanted to know.
Well, it's not your responsibility to upgrade that. You don't have to do that.
I know that.
No. Yes, sir.
Can you tell me how many units in Portland and how many in Parkside have become available for full market value?
For full what?
For full market value.
Well, all the units in both communities are now full market value units, except for the 5 or 10 that Sharon has.
No. They got the extensions. The extensions that came in.
I'm sorry, I don't know. Your question again?
Isn't there a cutoff date? You can be in for a certain date to qualify for full market value?
Well, they all qualify for market value on the anniversary of the 30 years, right?
Unless you've
Unless you've extended the control. So they all qualify to be market units. When the 30 years is up, they all qualify to be market units.
So anybody who purchased it a month ago can now sell it for full market value?
If anybody bought it before, let's say Cortland, April, they bought it April 5th, they sell it for full market value.
Okay. And also on the taxes, will the taxes be calculated retroactive from the date of full market value, or will it start on October 1st?
October 1st this year. Right. Report.
Okay, did you get, sir, did you get a handout sheet? If you turn to the third page of this.
So she's saying, she's saying, you would increase the restriction because even if you're paying $1,000 more, $800 more, $600 more for taxes. But if you sold it at fair market value, you're going to sell it for $50,000, $60,000 more. It's like, why would you put the restriction on? Because you're going to sell it much.
January 1st, 2020. You wouldn't see it in your February payment, you wouldn't see it in your May payment, because that's half of what you paid the previous year. You would see it in your August and November payment of 2020, that's the makeup. Right.
That's what's such a good.
Even though you're not going to see it in February, May, it commences January 1st, 2020.
So no.
You were paying, let's just say,
Every month, but you're 10 of extended.
And then your taxes, let's say, would jump up to, it would jump up to 2,000 a year, so now you would end up paying 500 in August, 500 in November, to make up that.
Then you extend it. But if you're looking to get out in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, take the cash and don't extend it. It all depends on someone's personal situation, right? Right, so it depends on what they want. You wouldn't see it pretty hard. It's the opposite situation. Not to take. Because you've got to go to another house, right?
Thank you.
I'm just curious, Citizen Bill's Green was up 30 years, and they go through all this that we're going through too?
Well, they haven't expired yet.
But they're well still.
Well, some have a 30-year, some have a 40-year deed restriction. Yes, sir.
Some are similar.
Brad, you okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just say from what we were talking about before, when you go to the division of taxation, I think the language, which should be different, said variable based on the housing prices. I think it's easier. It's to say the rules in place are 20% recapture. They should just be reduced 20%. I think it's as simple as that. Why should it be, based on the house prices? Because we're all obligated to the one fixed amount of 20%. It's another variable. Whatever, I chart the two options. Whatever figure it is, why would they just cutting that 20%?
So you're saying everybody should be just cut 20%?
Whatever category they fall into, since that's going to be the fixed obligation on our part when we sell.
20% of the assessed value? So if the market value was $200,000, I'm just making a number up, and you would say the assessment should be 20.
No, so say 200,000 based on the 1.38, right?
Right.
All right, say you're, I'll use mine. Say, 160,000 for two. Off the average, that would be the constant. So if your taxes were supposed to be gone up to 3,000, 20% off of that.
What model year?
Doesn't, two-story, two-bedroom, Model C.
Parkside?
No.
So Model C, the average, if you use the average, so if the average of a C is rounded $2,000, make it simple math. You're saying
20% off of that. That's the fairest.
20% off the taxes.
No, because that may vary based on renovations. But your
Because-
tax assessment
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he decides
But,
is
yeah,
what it is.
but that's for
So
the
it may
capture.
vary.
Right, so.
But that amount's not going to change.
Yeah, you're just saying just.
We're working on a
And I-
percentage, not a dollar. That's what makes it fair.
Right.
I agree with him.
But I understand what you're saying. So I'm not, in this case, you're not taking consideration of upgrades and renovations.
No, I am, because you have different figures.
So you're saying in the two, well, these are just averages. So you're saying whether it's a renovated or original unit, meaning they didn't
Yeah,
replace
just, it should be
that.
20%, would it?
20% off of that, not off the taxes, not 20, not yet. Okay.
It Ed, that should get you in the same, it should get you in the same place, right? Whether it's 20% here or 20% there.
Because the 20% is what we're all obligated to, so just go with that. Why convolute it with renovated, unrenovated? Tax rate's gonna change, right?
But I'm sorry, but that one is like, let's say if I want to sell it like in a year, 20% of the tax is just a couple of $100, but then I have to still pay like $10,000 to that. This is for a long run, but if I want to sell it like in 6 months or something,
I'm just
that
saying-
doesn't go with me.
I understand, I'm saying that minimum, this is where we can start.
But you've answered your own question in the sense that if you were looking for 20%, the idea is never to move. Because that's when you'd benefit on that scenario by reducing the taxes. You move in a year, technically, that would go away. It doesn't pass on to the next owner. It would go away because you were the original owner that had to pay that amount. So you would leave, the new owner's tax to 20% would go away.
No, I'm not
Right.
talking about that, I'm talking about the, whatever fee, 20% of that is $10,000. Still, I have to pay that. If you lower the tax, still I have to pay that 20% to it. That's the market. Because when I sell it, I sell it at the market value.
Right.
And then still, I'm losing. It's not just $200. Still, I'm losing $10,000, $12,000.
You're getting
That's
the
not
bid,
the
the
work.
money's out there, you're getting the bid, is what you're doing.
It's not
And
your
it's the same
fault,
thing like
but I
our
mean,
board members pointed out.
yeah.
About when we upgrade our places, you're getting as big as 20% of that. So if I put $15,000 into my unit and my profit goes up, you're gonna get 20% of the money that I invested in house. Which is the same of when our board pays the parking lot, redoes all the garbage, plans everything, and spends our maintenance fee money that we've been accumulating for X amount of years, you're getting, not you, you're getting the big, 20%. Now, we paid our maintenance fees in for 20 years, okay? Now our places are worth a little more because our neighborhood, what our board has done in the last, I don't know, 2-3 years, maybe more, has really done a lot. And I applaud them for that compared to the past. But now, you're getting 20% of it. Our maintenance, why don't you just complain, let me pay another 25% in taxes? I mean, I'm just saying. So these are the things, when you're looking at that 20%, needs to be redone, and needs to be rethought of. And especially the mayor made a point, same thing. If we're selling it at a certain part, that money should not be assessed in taxes. Those are 3 good points that we can actually come to a table, come to maybe some kind of an agreement, and lower this to make it fair for every single person that is living here. I think it's, I don't even want to say it, but I've been there 27 years. Now, if I'm not mistaken, was it 2008 that was the cutoff date? That you can now opt out, and people that bought in 2008 have to wait 30 years? Am I correct about that?
Well, if they opted, you mean people like
No,
say?
say you bought in 2008, do you have to wait 30 years to opt
Yeah.
out? Okay, then fine. So then there were people that if they bought in 2007, they only had to go 1 year. I get it, there's a cutoff date, that's fine. But to be here for 25 years, doing all this, paying into this, and we pay some good money. I mean, I applaud the fact that Bedminster is a great town and our taxes are not like Baskin Ridge.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we don't have the police force, we don't have the high school. I understand that, but we have a really good town. But we should not be taken advantage, I want to say taken advantage of like that. It's ridiculous. That's my point there.
Sure.
Okay? And on top of that, we should have been notified. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I don't want to hear a politician's answer, okay, where we should have been. When that came out, that you want to opt out or not, oh, you want to opt out, you know you still have to pay that 20%. That should have been done. Because what happened to Trina now, could be a crime in a sense for her and her family. That she is under contract to the house, but also now has to cough up $30,000. You can't, how are you going to justify that?
Okay, yes, sir.
How are you going to justify that?
Shouldn't the assessment be used to the date that it comes off the low income, the 20%, not 7 years from now, when you decide to sell, for example? You're getting equity when it's not low income, like in Parkside's in what was it, August 2017 prices, and Portland's in April of this year.
I think there was something in there about prepaying the recapture too. I was reading.
Yeah. Well,
In my spare time.
right now, Ed has assessed the affordable units, right, that existed in Cortland up until the 7th of April.
Right.
At a much reduced price, taking into consideration the deed restriction. Just like he would do if I owned a piece of property and 80% of it was wetlands and I couldn't walk on it, I couldn't use it, I couldn't do anything with it. He would take that into consideration on the value of my land. So he takes into consideration right now, that's why the taxes you saw, I think, are pretty reasonable. And he takes that into consideration. The deed restriction on your property restricts the value of the property. And he's been doing that for years. You've been treated right that way.
Right, so my question is, if I choose to sell my house years from now,
Right.
shouldn't it be, the 20% be off what the assessment is now, when it came off the low income?
Now that you're at market assessment, you mean, a full assessment?
Right.
Right. Well, I think that's what Ed's gonna look into at the suggestion.
No, that's a different issue.
So what I'm asking is, if I sell it 10 years from now, and I've got more equity in my house, I shouldn't be paying you the more equity, I should be paying 20% on the price when it comes off of low income.
Today.
Well, that's not what it says, but we can look at that, sure. But that's not what it says. And after all, the folks that stay in affordable units, right, you're gone. But there are two other communities that still have affordable units. They call up Sharon to sell their affordable units. I understand the numbers are much lower. They're still paying 20%. They're paying 20% to recapture, right? It's a lesser amount because the market rate price is much greater than the restricted price. But we'd have to treat those in the affordable units the same way.
But what I'm saying is, if I decide to redo my kitchen in 3 years, I'm not getting any benefits of being low income anymore, so you shouldn't get the benefits of my redoing my.
So let's say you assess her unit now, it's 180,000, but she decides to put in granite and redo her bathroom, and when she sells it, it's worth 260,000. She shouldn't have to pay you 20% of that 260,000.
You're not paying us.
No, I'm not saying, no, I get it. So look, all right, so we want to do brass numbers. She paid 100,000 for her unit. You've assessed it now at 180, but she puts rentals in it and it's worth 260. So she should only have to pay you the 20% between the 100,000 and the 180, not the 100,000 and the 260.
Exactly.
That's the point that she's making, and that's a very valid.
You're taking 20% of her renovation.
Yeah. So what's the sense of trying to even renovate it, but we're going to keep on paying that?
Well, we said earlier that we would take in building the basis of the house, right, the appreciation in the house, we would take into consideration your granite kitchen.
What rate are you depreciating?
Well, in this case, normally it's a very narrow 10% straight line depreciation on everything, right?
10% a year?
10% a year for 10 years, right? So you do it 5 years later, 50%. Right. But again, in order to try to make this as fair as possible, maybe we can do it differently by taking the improvements that you make in order to sell your market rate unit or increase the value of your market rate unit. Maybe that can be stuck on top of the restricted resale price plus the money out of your pocket to get closer to the 260. That's what I'm saying.
Those things are really not appreciated.
All I'm telling you is what the current rules are that we operate by is that if you put in a new refrigerator,
But
But you're still talking about different.
well, I know, we're talking about different improvements that are off the scale of what we normally deal with, and that's what I'm saying, we can address that.
I'm not talking about finance.
Right, that can be addressed. We can do it.
So follow up for final decisions have to be made. Between opting in and out. I think we should have, see what Ed finds out from the state, what you find out about it. Appreciate it, guys. When we have another meeting after those things have been answered, so everybody can feel better.
Have another meeting? Mr. Mayor, another follow-up meeting after we get some answers?
BHHC and want to have another meeting?
Sure. Have you signed up? We got your contact information. You'll all be notified. Yes,
I do, so when I purchased my unit, I'm assuming at some point I signed, when I was signing umpteen papers, something regarding the recapture fee.
Right.
Right? Who has copies of that?
Take a look at your deed. It probably says you bought subject to the rules, the master deed in your community. That's it, that's it.
So there was no form that I signed that said that I was gonna have to pay this 20% even after my unit came off of the position.
The deed to your property says subject to the master deed for the Cortland neighborhood community. As recorded in deed book, bing, bing, bing. That's it. And that's where it says it. There's no extra piece of paper you got that said recapture fee, beware, you gotta pay 20%. No.
But that when it was part of the moderate or low income housing, it was that 20%. Does it say after you release it, you have to pay that 20%?
That's what that says.
And when that was added to it,
No, that was put in 30 years ago in the book that governs your community. Okay, so we'll have a follow-up, everybody. Hopefully we'll have their contact information with Judy. We'll get answers and we'll come and we'll do it again. Well, we'll send out notice like we did last time to everybody in Portland and Parkside. And on the list. You got any in your little scrap? Thank you very much. Get rid of your cold, for your allergies. We knew this was going to happen. We knew. Clear.
Do you have the list of emails? Can this gentleman add to it?
Just so that if they threw out an idea or something to say, would you give me a 20% rate? Can I re-enroll and I have to qualify? We could have thought about that. And we would have said, sure. I don't care if you didn't qualify anymore. You were, and we'll relate your enrollment back to when you did it. Just kind of, we didn't Thank you very much for coming. All right, we'll follow up. We understand that you, every everybody would be upset. I mean, there's no question, I would be upset if I heard this. Okay. But we'll work through it. I appreciate that, thanks. All right, thank you. Thanks. We'll work through this. We'll work through it.
They're the owners.
It's a good town.